a look at other body of evidence called the coins. And you will be surprised to see how coins also will support everything we're discovering so far.
When I look at the coins, the Islamic narratives make no sense. The standard Islamic narrative that they have grown up with don't make any sense with these coins, and they don't know what to do. That's Abdülmalik establishing its own religion at the end of the Umayyad dynasty. Now this is the Umayyad dynasty in opposition to Christianity. So by 740, 950, you now are starting to see that this is a distinct religion against Trinitarian Christianity, which then morphed into Islam. It's still not Islam yet, because Islam was not introduced until 740, the word itself. So Islam then becomes much more of a religion under the Abbasids. That's 100 to 200 years later, in the 9th and 10th centuries, or even later. If you just look at the coins, you will see that.
Welcome to Events in History, where we explore the origins, teachings, and historical development of Islam with a fact-based, analytical approach.
What if the earliest physical evidence of Islam, its coins, tells a completely different story than the one we've been taught? In this episode, Dr. J. Smith shifts the focus from texts to something far more concrete: rock inscriptions and coins issued by early rulers like Muawiya and Abdülmalik. These aren't later writings, they're artifacts minted during the very period Islam is supposed to be forming. And what do they show? Crosses, Christian symbols, even imagery that appears to reflect debates about the Trinity and the nature of Jesus, rather than a fully developed Islamic identity. As the designs evolve, they begin to strip away Christian imagery and replace it with new inscriptions, raising a critical question: is this the birth of a new religion, or the transformation of Arian Christianity? Did Islam begin as a Christian Arian sect? This video dives into the timeline, symbolism, and political context behind these coins, challenging you to reconsider whether early Islam emerged independently or out of internal conflicts within Christianity itself. Let's watch it now.
Well, now we go to John of Damascus, and we see actually there is no Muhammad, because he's right. We know in Arabic there are no vowels. So take out the 3 vowels, you're left with 4 consonants: mim, ha, mim, dal. We went to his writing, John of Damascus, writing in 730, called The Heresy of the Ishmaelite, and we see that he refers refers to this prophet in the 8th century, and he names him in Greek. In Greek, there are vowels. You can see it, and he writes it as Muhammad. Muhammad. So what we want to do is we want to go to that Muhammad. And to do that, we need to see what it means. So let's go back to the slide and let's look and see what it means. Muhammad itself in Arabic means the praised one or the blessed one or the anointed one. So you notice this. It's not a name.
It's a title.
It's a title. It also means the Messiah, which is interesting. So when you go back to Muhammad, we find that this has been around for, well, it's from the Ugaritic title referenced it way back in 1400 BC. It's been around for thousands of years. 1400 BC, the Ugarites were the ones that kind of introduced it. The Hebrews that took it from Ugaritic, and they introduced it into the Old Testament. You will find the Muhammad in Hebrew 11 times in the Old Testament. So it's right there in our Hebrew Bible. We should have known this. We should have looked at it. Actually, the Muslims have been intimating it. They always go, don't they tell you that because in chapter 7, 157, and chapter 61, verse 2 in the Quran, it says, you will find this prophet, this unlettered one who cannot read or write, whose name is Ahmed. And so they've scoured our Bible to find this word Ahmed, and they found it in Song of Solomon 5:16. Chapter 5, verse 16. They say, see, we found Muhammad. Little do they know they're actually pretty close to what they're doing. But the problem is, it's not the Muhammad they're looking for. It's the Muhammad in Hebrew, which again is the same 4 letters in Hebrew that we have in Arabic. Arabic comes out of Syriac, comes out of Aramaic, of which Hebrew uses the same, very similar to this, very similar letters. And that's why Muhammad in Hebrew is the same Muhammad that the M-D that we see in Arabic. And of course, Song of Solomon was written 1000 BC. Now notice how we translate it into English, the altogether lovely one.
That's right.
And Song of Solomon, referring to Solomon himself. But later on, St. Ambrose in the 4th century, the early church father in the 4th century AD, took Song of Solomon and he says, wait a minute, if he is the altogether lovely one, this is a title for Jesus Christ.
It's almost like a metaphor or symbolism for Jesus and the church.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so from the 4th century on, other church fathers started employing Muhammad as the praised one or the anointed one. Who is the anointed one? The Messiah.
That's right.
Anointed to what? Anointed to save. So let's look at the slides and let's continue on. There are many examples of church fathers. I've just put a few up here. Oregon in the early 3rd century as a Christian theologian interpreted the Song of Solomon chapter 5 verse 16 passage as the unique scripture where the eschatological nuptials of Christ and his bride are present. That's why St. Ambrose then in the 4th century introduced the idea that the Song of Solomon 5:16 passage referred to Muhammad, who was therefore considered as a title for Jesus Christ the Messiah. That was picked up by Gregory of Elvira in the late 4th century. So did St. John Cassian in the late 4th and 5th century. They talk about Muhammad as the Messiah, Jesus Christ. St. Augustine introduces it in his writings in the late 4th and the early 5th century. And that continues right up into the 7th century when Apollonius, in the middle of the 7th century, then introduces. Therefore, as you look at it, as we know, that Muhammad was a common title for Jesus by the 7th century in the church in that part of the world. So we should not be surprised when we find it written in many places, as you're going to find. Muslims have been coming to us and we can find Muhammad all over the place. The problem is every time they find it, he's way up in Damascus or he's in Ctesiphon, which becomes Baghdad. He's over in Gaza. He's way up all over the north in Syria, in Jordan, and also in Lebanon. But he's not down in the Hijaz, proving that this must be a title for something else. But not just the Christians, the Jews also refer to Muhammad as the anointed one. Let's look at the slide here. In 523, this inscription was created way down in what is today Yemen. And so it's a 6th century Jewish rock inscription. It's part of a Himyaritic inscription, and it says, I'm not going to read it because I'll mess it up, but Rabhab bin Muhammad, translated mean by the Lord of the Jews, by the Muhammad. So the Lord of the Jews is known as the Muhammad. Where do we see that? Take a look right there where I'm putting the triangle.
Yeah, so Rab here is Lord. Hud is probably in reference to Yahud, or Jews.
Jews.
Yeah.
The Muhammad.
Yeah.
So it's a Sabbaic script. This is This would be the script that would have been used if the Quran were written in the Hijaz. This would be the Sabbaic script. Notice it's not the same script that you see in the Quran today. Isn't that interesting?
That's true. Yeah.
The Sabbaic script does not look like that. But it would, because all of those people in Yathrib, what is today Medina, and if Mecca did exist, they would have used this script. So this would be the Muhammad we're looking for. So who is this Muhammad that they're referring to? What we do know is that the Muhammad is known as the anointed one, the praised one. It is a title for the exilarchs. The exilarchs were those who were responsible for the seminaries, the Jewish seminaries, in what is today Kufa, what used to be called Hira, which is just south of what is today Baghdad, which used to be called Ctesiphon, up until the 9th century. Or 8th century, sorry, when the Abbasids changed it, and that was their capital. In Hira and in what is Kufa is where the Jewish seminaries, and they would have these men who were in charge of the seminaries, and they would always put Muhammad before their name. Muhammad ben Huzia. Muhammad means the praised one, or the anointed one, ben Huzio. Muhammad ben Salman. And every time the exilarch died, the next exilarch that came after would then introduce that title in front of his name. Muhammad, Muhammad, Muhammad. So there are 5 exilarchs in the 7th century alone who use Muhammad in front of their names. So it's well known by Jews at that time, well known by Christians at that time. That's why when Muslims have been coming to us and saying, we found Muhammad all over the place. No, you haven't. You haven't found Muhammad. Take off the 3 vowels. You're left with Muhammad. You're finding the Muhammad of the Jews and the Christians. Who is this Muhammad? This is the praised one that the Christians are waiting to return again. And this is the same Muhammad that the Jews yet are still waiting today for. He hasn't yet come. He is the Messiah who is yet to come for the Jews. He is the same Messiah that is going to return a second time for the Christians. Knowing that, we're then going to go and put it all together in the next slide.
And next episode, basically.
Sorry, the next episode.
We're going to summarize all of that. Why is this significant? One more time, please, for our viewers.
Because Muslims are looking for Muhammad. So have been many secular scholars looking for Muhammad. You're looking for the wrong word. Don't look for the man. Don't look for the name. Look for the title. Because in the 7th century, there was no name Muhammad. This was nothing more than a title that has been created way back in 1400 BC, introduced into Hebrew in 1000 BC, then introduced by Saint Ambrose in the 4th century AD. Saint Augustine and the other church fathers all attributed to Jesus Christ. And then in 523, the 6th century, that's the first time we see the Jews using it. It could be much earlier. It's just that's the first inscription.
And the Himyarite, by the way, would have been the southern kingdom in Yemen, modern day Yemen.
That's right.
Right.
So then we know that in the 7th century, the 600s, they then introduce it as the title for each one of their exilarchs. We know of 5 different exilarchs that had that title, anointed one, praised one, that were introduced in the 7th century by the Jews.
Now we shift the investigation to one of the most overlooked forms of evidence, 7th century coinage. The most reliable witnesses to early Islamic history aren't books, but coins? Not traditions written centuries later, not biographies passed through layers of narration, but cold, hard metal minted in real time. Because coins don't forget, they don't evolve, they don't get edited. These coins were the official voice of rulers, broadcasting identity, power, religion, and authority across entire empires. So naturally, if the traditional narrative is accurate, we should expect to see it clearly stamped into these artifacts. But what happens when the coins don't match the story? When the names are missing, the symbols don't align, and the locations point somewhere entirely different? That's where things start to unravel.
And you will be surprised to see how coins also will support everything we're discovering so far, or the title.
The material that I'm going to use comes from Audin LaFontaine, who's been on my channel. He is French. He is an expert on the as a numismatist. That means an expert on coins. And also Dr. Volker Pop, who is the world probably leading expert on these coins. Also, some of the material that I'm going to be using comes from Mel from Islamic Origins channel on YouTube. So this is not my material, this is their material, and I'm going to go through it. Some of this you will have seen before, but we're going to reassess it now, looking for Muhammad, not for Muhammad. Alright? So let's look at the screen, let's look at the PowerPoint, and let's go ahead and start there. Coins tell a story. They are one of the best windows into that time because they cannot be destroyed. They are as pristine as they are when they were minted, many of them. So why are coins important? Well, first of all, the Lydians were the ones that introduced coins in 600 BC. They were used for more than just commerce. They were used to really introduce a ruler's new the identity of a new ruler. He would have had TV or internet or newspapers or radio like we use today. They use coins to introduce this new ruler who is coming to power. Everybody used coins, so therefore everybody would have access to this new name. That's why it's so important at that time that you mint new coins. Now, what was on the coin? Well, the first thing they would put would be the image of themselves. Now, that in and of itself is problematic because we know that Muslims aren't allowed to put images on. Yet, all these coins have images on them. A ruler would introduce his reign using his image with his name right there. They would then always put his religion, and they would either put a cross to signify they're Christian, a fire altar to signify they're Zoroastrian. If they were Jews, they would do the Star of David or something equivalent.
Right.
If they were a Sasanian, they would put the crescent and the star. That was the Sasanian, or not. Interesting, this predates Islam.
That's right.
The crescent and the star is actually a political symbol of the Sasanian, the Zoroastrians. Isn't that interesting? And then they would put the date to place them into a time period, and then they would put the name of the mint where they were minted, which also would make sense. Now, the problem that the numismatists have is that they're looking at these coins from the 7th century, 620, 630, 640, 650, up until 660, and they're frustrated because the coins don't have what they're supposed to have. Everyone doing this research has been contacting me and others, and they're saying, hold on, when they look at the coins, the Islamic narratives make no sense. The standard Islamic narrative that they have grown up with don't make any sense with these coins, and they don't know what to do. So I tell them, forget what the standard Islamic narrative. They come from the 9th and 10th century, as we now know. They start to appear in the 11th to the 16th century. Folks, that's 400 to 900 years too late. Just tell me what's on the coin. That's their task. They need to just read what's on the coin. And they're doing that. And that's why when they look at the coin, they realize that the mints are in the wrong place as well. Just look at this map that you see there. Everything supposedly is supposed to be taking place down the Hijaz. That's Mecca and Medina. But they aren't. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, where are these mints placed? Take a look on the map. You'll see where they're placed. Tartus and Hims and Baalbek and Dimashq and Tabaria and Albi. Yeah, I'm not going to.
It's all north.
They're all northwest.
Modern day Syria.
That's
Jordan.
Syria and Jordan, Lebanon.
Israel,
and the other ones are over in what you would expect in Iran and Iraq. That would have been the Sasanian Empire.
And also looks like some of it in Afghanistan.
Not one mint
Pakistan.
down in the Hijaz.
Right.
Not one mint in the Hijaz. Why? Well, you know the reason why. there's just no water down there. No water, no food, no people, no towns, no towns, no city. No cities, no people, and no cities, no coins, because you need commerce down there. So, what then should they do? That's the question they do. And I said, well, the Islamic traditions assumed that people were living in that part of the world. They assumed that during the reign of the rightly guided caliphs from 624 to 66, as you want, that the empire expanded from all the way from Tripoli to West Afghanistan and the east, which incorporates all of these mints. There should be some evidence in this vast swath of land for this empire. The problem is, where are they on the coins that are minted? That's the difficulty. We need to find that. So, what we're going to do starting in the next episode, we're going to go to that time period. We're going to go to those mints. We're going to go to those coins. We're going to look at them. And we're going to read them as they are. And you're going to be surprised. Can we find Muhammad on those coins? That's next. So we're well into the Umayyad period. Oh, by the way, I'm doing fine. We're well into the Umayyad period. We've now looked at Muawiya. It's pretty clear that he is a Trinitarian Christian. Now we come to Abdülmalik, who comes to power in 685 and continues up until 705. There's been some dispute. Some believe that he was actually in power since 680, but I'm going to I'm going to go with 685 just to be conservative. Let's go to the slide and let's look at his date. Now, I have that coin up there. That coin is the coin that he should have been using, what he should have been using when he's paying homage. All the Umayyads